During the 1930s and 40s, Murder Incorporated did the dirtiest work the New York mob had to offer, providing hitmen for the most famous criminals of the day, while ensuring the big bosses were never linked to the actual crimes. Consisting of Italian and Jewish gangsters, the organization, founded by Charles Luciano, Bugsy Siegel, and Meyer Lansky, is estimated to have been responsible for 1,000 murders during their reign of terror, which would eventually come to an end, thanks to one of their own. The death of Murder Inc. hitman Abraham Kid Twist Reles remains one of the most enduring mysteries in gangland lore. Law enforcement and the press noticed the rise in unexplained and unprosecuted murders of gangsters. New York prosecuting attorney Thomas Dewey was the crime-busting, politically ambitious prosecutor. He chose an aggressive Irishman named William O'Dwyer as his assistant and gave him the job to eliminate this professional criminal culture that had dominated New York City since Prohibition. O'Dwyer found a good informant named Harry Rudolph, who ratted on Abe Reles. The handwritten notes held by Assistant District Attorney Burton Turkis didn't look like much, but it was the thread that, when pulled, would eventually unravel the fabric of Murder Inc. Written on the stationery provided to inmates at New York's Rikers Island City Warehouse, it read, "Dear Sir, I'm doing a bid over here. I'd like to talk to the district attorney. I know something about a murder in East New York." The letter was signed Harry Rudolph. Rudolph was well known to the New York law enforcement community. Detectives called him a full mooner, someone whose mental faculties were not all there. Harry was serving a short stint for a misdemeanor, so he wasn't looking for a sentence reduction in exchange for cooperation. Turkis and his investigators, who had been working on nearly 200 unsolved homicides believed to be connected to organized crime, decided to talk to Rudolph. "Those rats killed my friend, Red Alpert. Those Brownsville boys, Reles, Bugsy, Dookie Maffetore. Yeah, they took Red when he came out of the house." 19-year-old Alex Red Alpert, a small-time hood, had been shot at the edge of his house in 1933. He apparently had been involved in a jewel heist and tried to fence some of the goods to Pittsburgh Phil. The two men had been unable to agree on a price for the gems, and Pittsburgh Phil was angry over Red's insolence. Murder Inc. was called in, and Red paid with his life. For more than 6 years, the crime had remained on the unsolved list. Rudolph's allegations were good enough to allow Turkis to get a grand jury indictment of Reles, Dookie, and Bugsy Goldstein. Turkis didn't hold out a lot of hope of getting a conviction of the men on just the testimony of a full mooner like Rudolph, but he got the indictment because at least it would keep them off the streets, until a trial anyway. The cops picked up Dookie the afternoon the indictments were handed down. Word went out that Reles and Bugsy were wanted men. Surprisingly, they turned themselves in the next morning. "The same old crap. We're here. This is the old walk in and walk out." Ironically, the two men who had beaten so many raps before turned themselves in on the one murder charge that stuck. Maffetore wasn't the brightest bulb in the Brownsville mob. A sleek young flyweight, Dookie was an avid reader of Little Abner and Superman comics, but like the rest of the gang, wasn't afraid to kill. His English left a lot to be desired, and he was more comfortable speaking Italian. Turkis and the police decided to lean on Dookie because they were convinced Kid Twist and Bugsy would never talk. But Dookie was tough. The law tried everything to get him to break, but Dookie knew what happened to stool pigeons. Nowhere would be safe if he squealed. A guy could get a shiv in the neck in the prison yard, just as easy as he could go down in a burst of gunfire in the street, like a dog. Hey, copper, come over here for a minute. It's worth $5,000 to me if I pin this on Dookie and square it with Kid Twist and Bugsy. There were corroborating witnesses who told Turkis that Reles and Goldstein planned to sell out Dookie Mafatore. The assistant DA lost no time in telling Dookie how his friends were willing to sell him out. That broke Metafore's will, and he sang for more than an hour about what he knew of the mob and Murder Inc. But it was clear that Dookie was a fringe player, and a higher-up was needed to fill in the gaps. You dirty, stinking coppers. Why don't you go talk to Pretty, huh? He's smart. He knows a hell of a lot more than me. Pretty Levine, a killer with big blue eyes and curly hair, had been involved in half a dozen slayings by the time he was 23. A newlywed, Pretty and his wife Helen tried to make a break from the underworld and almost made it, until Helen gave birth to their first child. Pretty had been driving a truck and hauling garbage. He wasn't rich. When the hospital demanded payment before it would discharge his wife and newborn, Levine was forced to go to Pittsburgh Phil and borrow $100 at 6 for $5. $1 a week interest for every 5 borrowed. Over time, Pretty couldn't make his VIG, the interest payments, so he was forced to go back to working for the crew. When Turkis went out to pick up Pretty, Pittsburgh Phil was gunning for him because he thought both Dookie and Pretty would be valuable to the law. Fortunately for both men, Turkis and the New York City police beat the Murder Inc. gunman to Pretty's house. Downtown, Pretty was putting up a good front. He stonewalled Turkis for days and forced the assistant DA to take desperate measures. Turkis knew he was onto something big. Just what and how big he didn't know. But he was determined not to let Pretty set the agenda. Bring in his wife, Turkis told his investigators. The lawmen picked up lovely Helen Levine, and with her 16-month-old daughter, took her downtown to see her husband. Helen begged Pretty to tell what he knew, but he stayed tough. They will kill me if I talk. But then he relented a bit. All right. I'll talk about what I've done. I won't talk about any more than that. Pretty spilled his guts about the crimes he and Dookie had committed, including one in which the two punks stole a car for someone and had it returned with a body in it. That's all you coppers are getting out of me. Now send me to jail. It took Abraham Pretty Levine another couple of days before he finally cracked and implicated Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss, Harry Happy Mayone, Frank Dasher Ebendondo, Louis Capone, no affiliation with Al Capone, Martin Bugsy Goldstein, and Abe Reles in a number of murders. After sitting in the tombs in downtown Manhattan for several weeks, Reles got a visit from one of his attorneys, who informed him that Murder Inc. was unraveling. Realizing the next stop on the Murder Incorporated Express was Sing Sing's electric chair, Reles sat down and wrote a note to his wife, telling her to seek out the DA. Burton Turkis and Thomas Dewey wanted Abe Reles' scalp and were slowly gathering enough evidence to pin something on him. Perhaps something that would send him straight to the electric chair. The law never expected that Kid Twist would sing, even if the alternative was a one-way trip to the Sing Sing death house. Abe Reles was still cocky when he sat down with ADA Burton Turkis and Brooklyn DA William O'Dwyer. He was without remorse and laughed out loud when Turkis started talking about the murder of Red Albert. You think any jury would convict even a cat on what that bug Rudolph says? You ain't got no fucking cooperation. I can make you a big man, but I walk. If anyone knew where the bodies were buried, it was Kid Twist. After all, if he hadn't been in on the slaying, he knew who did it and why. Reles was tough. He was egotistical and he was smart. He knew the law better than most gangsters and felt he was a match for any attorney or detective. He had a long police record, but few convictions. He had 6 times been charged with homicide and never convicted. He was arrested 9 times on assault charges and had 1 conviction. Between 1932 and 1940, Abe Reles was arrested on average once every 78 days. His longest sentence had been 2 years for assaulting a parking attendant with a bottle. From 1932 to 1934, the law had picked up Kid Twist 23 times, but he had spent just 30 days in jail. O'Dwyer and Turkis knew that Reles would give them enough to break Murder Inc., but they were reluctant to deal with such a cold-blooded killer. Eventually, though, a deal was reached. Kid Twist would testify before grand juries and at trials, but he would not waive his immunity from prosecution. The law couldn't prosecute him for the killings he admitted to, but if something else came up, it was fair game. Kid Twist talked for 2 weeks straight. His memory was amazing. He remembered who was hit, who hit them, and why. No details were left out. Before he was finished, Reles helped the police close the books on 85 separate killings in Brooklyn alone, and for the first time, revealed the organization and structure of the National Syndicate. He testified at trials in Los Angeles, Newark, and New York City. His information would send 4 men directly to the chair, including Louis Lepke Buchalter. The biggest fish Abe Reles had to offer the police was Albert Anastasia, one of New York's most prominent gangsters and the head of Murder Inc. The authorities had never been able to pin anything directly on Anastasia until Reles came along. By 1941, a momentous trial was underway that threatened New York's most brutal bosses, specifically the Lord High Executioner, Albert Anastasia. Anastasia had become involved with the murder of a local teamster, Morris Diamond. Although he had dozens of hitmen who Reles could have provided to take care of the killing for him, and ensure he could never be directly implicated. For reasons unknown, Anastasia planned out Diamond's death himself. Unfortunately for him, Reles had overheard the details. 35-year-old Reles was expected to testify shortly against mob boss Louis Lepke Buchalter. Earlier court appearances had been in murder cases against fellow Murder Inc. hitmen Harry Happy Mayone, Frank the Dasher Abendondo, Martin Bugsy Goldstein, and Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss. Reles also aided California authorities in obtaining indictments against Benjamin Bugsy Siegel and Frank Pug Carbo for the November 1939 Hollywood murder of Harry Big Greenie Greenberg. O'Dwyer based his case on his star witness, Abe Reles. While Buchalter was on trial along with Louis Capone and Emmanuel Mendy Weiss for the September 1936 murder of Joseph Rosen, Reles and 3 fellow murderers turned informants, Sholem Bernstein, Max Rubin, and Albert Tenenbaum, awaited the DA's next move in their hotel suites, known by the police as the Squealer's Suite. The men were under round-the-clock NYPD protection at the Half Moon Hotel on Coney Island. Lurking in the shadows was news that the Mafia Commission had put out the word that anyone who killed Abe Reles would be paid $100,000. The night was cold and windy. The temperature during the hours of 3 a.m. and 7 a.m. on the morning of November 12, 1941, was somewhere in the vicinity of 35 degrees, with a wind velocity of 20 to 30 miles per hour. It was customary, followed on the evening in question, that sandwiches, cold cuts, milk and coffee be delivered to the main suite, Suite 620, where Abe Reles and his fellow hitmen were engaged in a game of cards. 2 hours later, Sholem Bernstein, Max Rubin, Albert Tenenbaum, and Abe Reles began to retire to their respective suites for the night. Shortly before 3 a.m., one of the police guards on duty, while making coffee for himself, saw Reles, who had not yet retired, walking in the corridor of the suite. The guard offered him a cup of coffee. Reles declined the offer and went into his room. This was the last time that Abe Reles was seen alive by anyone in the suite. Upon the retirement of Reles and the other 3 informants, the police guards also settled down for the night. 3 of them went to bed. The other 2, who were in separate rooms, made themselves comfortable in chairs on which they dozed for most of the evening. The quiet thus established was unbroken until 7 a.m., when hotel management telephoned to advise them that one of the prisoners was no longer in the suite. On November 12, 1941, and for about 14 months prior, the then District Attorney of Kings County, William O'Dwyer, had established quarters for the safeguarding of material witnesses in the prosecution of various defendants who were part of a group commonly known as Murder Incorporated. These quarters consisted of the entire east wing of the 6th floor at the Half Moon Hotel on Coney Island in Brooklyn, was known as Main Suite 620. The hotel fronting on the boardwalk faced the ocean and extended from East 28th Street on the east side to East 29th Street on the west. The suite was made up of 10 rooms. A special door, which was the only entrance into and out of the suite, was constructed across a corridor leading to it. The door had a peephole in it, and in addition to a lock, was further secured on the inside by a wooden bar placed into metal brackets secured to the frame of the door. The main suite, Suite 620, consisted of a corridor with rooms leading off from it. At the furthermost end of the suite, facing the ocean, was one room which was used as a sitting room. One of the rooms on the east side of the suite, with a connecting door to this sitting room, as well as a door to the corridor, was Suite 623, which was occupied by Abe Reles. This room had adjoined to it a private bathroom. Three shifts of police guards, consisting of about 18 men, were assigned to guard the hitmen turned witnesses. It was the practice for at least several months prior to November 12th that each of the shifts be on duty 24 hours, from 10 a.m. on one day to 10 a.m. the following day. About 6:45 on the morning of November 12th, 1941, the secretary of the local draft board, who occupied room 123, 5 floors directly below Abe Reles' Suite 623, discovered the body of a man lying outside his window on the extension roof. He immediately communicated with hotel management. Thereupon, the manager phoned the main suite, 620, and advised the police guards that one of the prisoners was lying on the extension roof. He and the assistant manager also viewed the body from the draft board office. The guard, advised by telephone, began an immediate inspection of the bedrooms. He found that the room occupied by Abe Reles was empty. He looked out of the window of room 623 and saw the body lying below on the extension roof. He went down to the roof and verified that it was the body of Abe Reles. Reles was lying on his stomach, with the left side of his face in contact with the pebbled surface of the roof. His head was facing toward the boardwalk, and his feet were pointed toward Surf Avenue. His body was about 9 feet away from the wall of the hotel, from which room 623 opened. He was fully clothed. Reles did not die immediately upon falling to the roof, according to expert medical opinion. In fact, he lived at least 10 minutes after he hit the roof, and possibly for as long as a half an hour. We cannot find whether Reles was conscious or unconscious after he hit the roof, nor can we say that he did or did not change his position by crawling or otherwise after he landed. Lying with the body and partly entwined with it were 2 bed sheets which had been knotted together, with an overall length of 8 feet and 11 inches. Tied to one end of the sheets was a 4-foot piece of insulated 14 gauge, 7-strand, tinned copper wire. Upon inspection of room 623, which Reles had long occupied as his private suite, it was discovered that the window which overlooked the extension roof was wide open, and that attached to the radiator immediately beneath this window was a length of wire of the type found attached to the sheets near the body of Reles. This length of wire extended from its point of attachment on the radiator to the end of the sill of the window in room 623. Investigation of the activities in the suite on the day before Reles' death disclosed that Mrs. Reles arrived there on the evening of November 11th, sometime after 7 p.m., and that she visited privately with her husband in his room for approximately 3 hours. Upon arrival, she carried a bag in which she had placed a bottle of whiskey. This she gave to her husband. She left shortly before 11 p.m. after a contentious meeting with Reles. Witnesses claim they could hear both parties shouting at one another. Soon after Mrs. Reles' departure, someone in the main suite, 620, telephoned the front desk of the hotel and asked the night clerk then on duty whether room 523, the one directly below Reles' bedroom, was vacant. He was informed that it was. The room was in fact vacant. Room 523, directly below room 623, was found to be locked. The latch on the window was pulled over about 1/4 inch and had to be moved before the window could be opened. A half screen on the outside of the window was raised to within 6 inches from the top of the upper half of the window. This was not its usual position. On the stone windowsill of room 523, scratches were observed, as were marks of scraping on the paint of the window frame. The distance between the windowsill of suite 623 and the windowsill of suite 523 was 10 feet and 1/4 inch, and the distance from the windowsill of room 523 to the extension roof to which Reles fell was 42 feet, 3 1/4 inch. At 7:20 a.m., the Telegraph Bureau of the Police Department was notified that an unidentified man had jumped or fallen from the Half Moon Hotel. Much of the speculation concerning Reles' death centered around the theory that Abe Reles was the corroborating witness against one Albert Anastasia in the killing in Brooklyn of one Morris Diamond on May 25, 1939. And though a lifetime has passed since the mysterious death of one of Murder Inc.'s most brutal hitmen, the speculations continue. How did Abe Reles end up face down on that extension roof outside his 6-story hotel suite in the early morning hours of November 12, 1941? Did he fall to his death in an attempt to escape? Was he killed? If so, who by? Were the police involved? Was he forced out of that window overlooking the extension roof? Or was his death simply accidental? Though a hit sanctioned by the Commission is the more sensational of any of the speculations, the official investigation into the circumstances surrounding the death of Abe Reles on November 12, 1941, at the Half Moon Hotel on Coney Island, as presented by the grand jury, is as follows. Abe Reles apparently tied 2 bed sheets together, and on one end tied a 4-foot-long insulated electrical cord, then affixed the cord to the radiator, intending to lower himself through the window of the room beneath his. Someone had lowered the screen of that window by about 1/2 foot. Police later noticed marks on the radiator, perhaps from the rubbing of the cord. Reles appeared to have made it to the ledge outside his window. Police would link scuff marks on his shoes to scratches on the ledge, but he did a lousy job fastening the wire to the radiator. The wire gave way, and he plunged 4 stories in a sitting position onto a roof extension below, shattering his spine. Reles died of a fractured dislocation of the 4th and 5th lumbar vertebrae, ruptured liver and spleen, and hemorrhage in the abdomen. When he fell from the window, Reles was not under the influence of alcohol. On the contrary, chemical analysis of his brain showed the presence of only a faint trace of alcohol, insufficient to affect his actions in any way. Chemical analysis showed that there were no drugs or poisons of any kind in any of the vital organs. There were no bullet wounds, no stab wounds, or any other marks of violence on his body. He had sustained no injuries to his skull, brain, or to the coverings of the brain.